I think we're at a kind of a, not so much an inflection point, but I think at a point where a lot of people are like sort of questioning like what they're going to do around content and like what investments are going to pay off. And I'm starting to see some obvious patterns emerge. I think like focus on it, like really, really high quality.
Hey, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Briefly. Today, we're doing part 2 with John Collins. In the last episode, it's actually a recorded version of an office hours we did about 18 months ago. We cover a lot of John's career at Intercom and Ramp. There's a ton of great stuff in there, which is why I decided to put it in the podcast feed. Today, we're talking with John, kind of an update to that. So he spent the last almost 2 years as consultant and advisor. He works with Series A, B, and C SaaS companies. He helps them spin up their content strategy. He helps them actually get it rolling. So we talk all about that. We talk about some of the patterns he's seeing across those companies, kind of lost faith he's seeing in content marketing as a whole, and specifically SEO. Talk a little bit about some of the larger investments that some of the companies he's working with are making in video and data analysis. And there's even some examples there, which he talks through and will be in the show notes too. So great episode. John's one of the smartest, most legendary content marketers ever to do it. And I'm very grateful to have him on the show today. As always, really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Hey everybody, Jimmy from Superpath here today with John Collins. This is a kind of a part 2. So I just published our office hours we did from 18 months ago or so. So I'm sure we'll at least briefly mention Intercom Ramp. You can learn all about John's work at both of those companies in the previous episode. Today, we're going to focus, John, mostly on your consulting work, which you've been now doing for a couple of years. Before we do all that, though, you did an intro in the last episode, but it's sort of outdated. Would you mind just doing a quick intro of yourself for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with your work or kind of just catching up?
Sure. So yeah, I'm John. I'm a marketing advisor and consultant, mostly on the content side. My background is I ran content and comms at Ramp, the fintech, a New York-based fintech that's been on a bit of a tear the last few years. Prior to that, I was at Intercom for 7 years, actually. So I was there from sort of like founded the content function there and sort of really built it out into something that not just helped the brand for Intercom, but also I think, was generating leads, etc., and also, handle things like sales enablement, etc. And prior to that, for, more years than I care to remember, I was a journalist, mostly covering tech and business for a variety of publications in mostly in Ireland, where I'm based. Very cool.
I do have to ask you this. I had Sarah Yin on a few episodes ago, who you worked with at Intercom. She's at Slack now, and we talked just briefly about some of the failures at Intercom, which to be honest, I was never really thought about, because in my mind, Intercom's like legendary content marketing brand. We didn't go into any great detail though. Is there anything there that you want to share? I mean, in the spirit of like, you tried something, Sure. It didn't work as well as you hoped it would, you moved on to something else.
Oh wow, there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, video was definitely one that we never really cracked, and it's kind of interesting because I see Intercom now are sort of like in their sort of maybe like third or fourth iteration of content. They're going huge on video. Like they've got like TV studios and their offices and stuff now. They're doing this off script series, which is just like off the charts high quality. But yeah, that was something that during my tenure there, we never really got figured out properly. But probably the biggest one, actually, the biggest investment was we actually were like, hey, we've got this kind of content marketing and thought leadership stuff down pretty well. It's performing pretty well. Like, what's next and where's all this going? And actually, we looked at like the whole area of news and like doing this kind of like almost like filtering the news for folks and sort of like say, look, here's your 5 o'clock email. It's like, we'll give you everything that's happened in the tech world today or the software world today. We hired someone for that. We like heavily resourced it. And we never launched it for a variety of reasons. So
interesting.
That was a pretty big one. But I mean, generally, and it's something that's been in good stead ever since. Like at Intercom, we would always try and do like small experiments. Like, what's the minimum thing we can do to get some like data points and like figure out is, rather than go and make that big investment. And I think that was probably one of those points where actually we went and hired someone for it before we even really had any data or really understood if this was going to work. So, it's something that the product team at Intercom have always done. Try and get feedback as soon as possible, ship off and all that kind of stuff. And I think we actually did that on the content side as well, but in that case, we didn't. And Didn't work out so well. But hey, you live and learn.
Yeah, you live there. I mean, one thing that I always have admired about Intercom's content is that it's not like Intercom struck gold and then just kept mining the same mine, just hoping for more. Like, you guys nailed the thought leadership thing. And then kind of, as you mentioned, like they're in their third or fourth phase of different content initiatives, like always sort of reinventing itself, never falling prey to the innovator's dilemma where you just let somebody else come overtake you because you're not willing to try the new thing.
Yeah, totally. And as I say, I think that's across the company. I don't think that's unique on the content side. I think it's relatively unique, probably in terms of content marketing teams that like they're onto that fourth iteration, and it seems to be working pretty well. I mean, I'm super impressed with what I saw with Off Script. I mean, as the company is kind of focused on customer service, like really impressed how they've like pivoted content to support that. I mean, one of the pluses and minuses when I was there was that like we were pretty broad. We were selling to like marketing, support, sales teams, which was great from a content perspective. You create content for a bunch of different personas, and there was a large surface area to play against. But I suppose the challenge then on the other side of that is like, is it just a case of like you're not really engaging with any of them really deeply? But that was definitely something we always were aware of, and like trying to make sure that we address that.
Intercom is such a great history lesson, content marketing. But I promised myself that I wouldn't ask you too many questions about it because I do want to know about what you're doing now. Sure. So you've been an advisor consultant now for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Paint that picture. Like, what kind of work are you doing? What types of customers do you like working with? How busy are you?
It's quite an interesting one, actually. Like coming up actually 2 years in September. And it's funny, I actually ran into someone who in the tech industry here locally in Ireland who like works as a kind of a fractional CFO and kind of consultant on that side for software companies. And I was like in the first month of this, he was like, "Oh, it'll take you 2 years to figure out like what you actually do and where you add value." I was like,
"Oh, interesting."
I mean, I know exactly what I do. But actually she was spot on. I mean, it does take a while to actually figure out like where do you actually add value? Like what does a good client, like what's a good engagement look like? I've worked with everything from like private equity spinouts to like companies that are like less than 6 months old, and everything in between, like at every stage, not every stage obviously, but at many points along that journey. And I think it's learning like where can you add the most value. So I suppose like first off, what I try to do and what I enjoy doing is work with people on content strategy. But I think I realized pretty early on that like it's one thing to come and say, "Hey, look, we've looked at your go-to-market motion, we've looked at everything at your competitors, do all this analysis. Here's what we think you should do with your content strategy." And I think like it's very easy for you or I to do that and then walk away. But actually what you don't realize is that for most companies, actually putting that into like actually making that happen is quite a challenge. And so the second piece that I do quite a bit is more on the sort of like org structure and helping people like look at like how are we going to resource this? Like, do we need freelancers? Do we need to hire people in-house? Is there agencies out there that we can work with? And so I kind of use my network to sort of like not just decide what that should look like, but then also like source people for them. I mean, some clients have even got involved with interviews and like, actually helping them hire people in-house. So it's making sure that you have the strategy, but then also figuring out like how the hell are we actually going to do this?
Yeah.
That's, as I say, I think that's still non-trivial for a lot of folks. I think it's something that people who work in content marketing all the time kind of take that for granted a little bit almost. So that's kind of what I do. And as I say, I think like the sweet spot is probably like, companies probably like, I hate to say like tied to sort of venture stage, but probably like series A through C is probably like the sweet spot. They've got a real product market fit. They've got a sense of their positioning. They know who they're trying to sell to, what the ICP looks like. They've got a marketing team that like you can integrate the content strategy with, so that it's not just a case of, we're publishing a lot of content, but we're not really going to see, we're not going to convert it because we don't have the rest of the marketing machine to wrap around it.
Yeah.
And so that's been probably where the most successful engagements have been. But again, it very much depends on the client and really their sort of understanding of content and even the space they're in as to how successful.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of things are you seeing out there right now? Or are you seeing patterns across the different companies you work with? Like one thing I sense is a bit of chaos, maybe is the right word, that affects everyone a little bit differently. But many companies still have some of the same questions related to content marketing. Maybe a little bit of a loss of confidence in SEO. Maybe it's healthy actually.
Yep.
That they're thinking about like how do we diversify? They're thinking about they have fear around generative AI, maybe a little hint of excitement, but some skepticism too. Like I wonder for some teams if it slowed them down, like if they're sort of hesitating, not exactly sure what to do next, or if you're seeing other teams that are just being like, hey, there's a lot of blue ocean out there. Like, let's just try lots of things. Sorry, very, very long question.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, well, no, it's interesting because I mean, when I started this like September, like 2 years ago, next September, like I think there was a financial like uncertainty and like the whole sort of venture backed game was like changing very, very quickly, particularly as I said, those kind of companies where I see I can add a lot of value, that like suddenly it was like, we got to cut costs and we got to figure out, how we're going to make our money go further, or how do we actually stop investing in growth and actually think about like turning a profit. And so suddenly there was a lot of, I think there was a lot of layoffs in content. I think content was definitely probably hit. Marketing was generally hit, and I think within that, content was probably hit even further, which which is sucks to see, to be perfectly honest. But I suppose as a consultant, the upside of that is actually people were more willing to hire consultants. I think a lot of that has worked its way out of the system. I think what you're seeing now is more, I would say, a little bit of crisis of faith in content marketing. It is not as easy to deliver. I don't think there's a sort of a standard playbook in the way that probably there was around 2016, 2017, 2018 in the sort of B2B SaaS worlds that like I sort of operate in, and I know that you've done a lot of work in, where it was like there was a playbook you could follow and you would get like decent results. I mean, obviously you applied it to your particular ICP and your particular sector, but I mean, it wasn't rocket science. I think, like SEO is a huge issue now. It's getting really harder. I was going to say I have mixed feelings on that. I actually don't really, in the sense of I think that like, I think a lot of focus on SEO was a bit of a like, just a focus on traffic, and like we get lots and lots of people on the website, and we've got to rank for these like keywords that like generate lots of traffic. But you run into then what I call the like high school project problem, which is like, if someone like Ramp, if they've got articles like how to create a budget, I'm not really sure that like a CFO who is about to change the spend management platform and bring in a new card, all his employees, is Googling, how do I create a budget?
Right.
There's traffic for it. But is it actually going to be traffic that converts? So I actually think, we're seeing a lot of people focus on this idea of pain points and pain point SEO, and like thinking about like, higher intent traffic. And I think that is just makes way more sense. Like, does it really matter if you get like, 100 visitors to your blog every month if like 98 of them are like actually qualified and could buy your product? Probably not. I mean, they'd be amazing figures. And I think that we're not in the publishing game, we're in the content marketing game, and so I think that's key here. That we should be not focused on traffic and be much more focused on engagement, conversion.
Yeah, so interesting. Back in the day when I was doing sales for animals, one thing we would hear on sales calls all the time was people saying, "We're not getting enough traffic." They have this anxiety about it, and then you get a look at their Google Analytics and you think, "Really? It seems like kind of a lot of traffic, actually." And I think part of it was it's difficult to benchmark. Like if they could see what we saw from the agency perspective, you could tell them like, actually, you're doing great. Most sites are not getting this much traffic, but that you're right though. The thinking around traffic was just so pervasive, probably because SEO is just whatever. It's a greater opportunity than it probably is right this minute.
Yeah, and I get it. If you're converting like 3% of your visitors and you're getting like 1,000 visitors a month, you're like, well, why don't we get 10,000 visitors and we'll get, convert X amount more. But, it's a pretty inefficient way of working when you think about it.
Yeah.
You're actually willing to live with those kind of conversion numbers. So yeah, I think the SEO thing is really sort of like spooking people. And I think like you're right. There's like, I think we're at a kind of a, not so much an inflection point, but I think at a point where a lot of people are like sort of questioning like what they're going to do around content and like what investments are going to pay off. And like I'm starting to see some obvious patterns emerge. I think like focus on it, like really, really high quality. Like, I mean, I talked about Intercom's off script thing there, like where they are doing these like almost like, it's almost like a chat show from the like 80s or 90s or something, where it's like this deep like conversation, it really well shot in it. And like they have created, what I understand, like TV studios in their offices in San Francisco and Dublin to shoot these.
No way.
And I think like whether it's like, or Atomico, like the venture capital firm who are big here in Europe. Like, I mean, they do one piece of content every year, which is their like state of European startups, which is this massive data report. And so it's rather than that sort of like, hey, we're going to publish 3 blog posts a week, or we're going to like, do a weekly podcast. I think a lot of those things are seeing diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Data driven, I think, is also huge. Like seeing a lot of that customers, like a lot of customers coming to me going, hey, we've got this, like our product creates data. Like we're our customers are connecting to our platform. There's a lot of interesting insights there. How do we actually turn that into content? That was something we did really successfully at Ramp. Obviously they have a charge card that like businesses are using. So we looked at like, what are people actually spending on quarter by quarter? Like, how is that changing? What are the trends? And, start use these Ramp benchmarks that we publish every quarter. And, that's still going and still performing for them. There's another really interesting startup, Ravio, that I did some work with, who are, they basically do compensation information on like how startups are compensating their staff in European markets. And like, they're doing a great job in terms of like, people are connecting their HR platform to Ravio. They're getting all these insights and then they're publishing them in aggregate and sharing them out to the market. And so it's an absolutely great way of getting people to just get a sense of like what can be done with your product and the kind of, the kind of data you have. And so you really sort of draw people in that way.
As you're describing some of these examples, the thing that's at the top of my mind is the changing skill set of the content marketing team, right? Like content marketing teams who maybe used to just write, maybe they're like strong editorial background, they're great writers, they know how to scale quality. Now the content team, maybe it's the same people, maybe it's different people, are thinking about how to tell a story with video, how to shoot it, how to produce it, how to analyze data. These are skills that traditionally, I guess, content marketers don't really have. And it's just sort of an open-ended thought. Like, I don't know what the skill set of the content marketer looks like a few years from now. I imagine it's quite a bit more diverse than it has been.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, the way I think about it is like a lot of us were writers back in the back in the day, like 8-10 years ago, like because we were producing a lot of the content, and it was kind of almost like these 2 or 3 person teams that like were getting blogs off the ground, and it was easy enough to sort of make the move then maybe into podcasting from that because it's quite similar. I think the role is much more like an editor now, if we use that, that it's a sense of like, I can edit a data report, but I'm going to have to like partner with like a data science team or someone who can do SQL queries and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like that kind of editing job where you're pulling stuff together, you're partnering with different people. And I think it's those kind of skills. I mean, the reality is, I think, that you are invariably partnering with people from all over the company now when you're doing content. If you want to do that high quality content, and it's an investment, and so like over the years, I mean, I definitely like partnering with data teams has always been a bit of a challenge because they're always concerned that you're like the integrity of the data, and there's like marketing going to try and make the data say something that it doesn't, and all this. I think like you're partnering really deeply with designers and creatives, like video creatives, people like that. So it's definitely a different skill set, but I still think like that if you've come from that sort of writing, editing background, it's a really solid place to be a sort of like either an IC or a leader in content marketing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's fascinating. Content has become so deeply embedded into many of these organizations. It's difficult to separate out just the content people who, maybe used to be responsible for that traffic, and now they're responsible for, in some cases, like the voice and tone of the entire company.
Yeah, and I think it's like with a lot of these, it's becoming almost more like product led growth, that you're involved in a lot more of those kind of initiatives, which traditionally would have been like separate, I think, to content. I think it's great. It's really exciting time for the companies that are embracing that and start to understand that.
Yeah. What have you learned about working for yourself? I'm just sort of curious how it's gone, any lessons you've learned along the way. I mean, we have a lot of folks in the Slack community who work independently or maybe aspire to at some point. I personally had a brief failed freelance career, which scared me back into getting a job, and took me a couple of years actually to build the confidence back up to go try it again. But I'm just curious, like, how it's been for you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was lucky, I suppose. Back in my journalism days, I did work as a freelance journalist for a number of years, and I would say that, like, was it Hunter S. Thompson who said, "I love the sound, I love deadlines, I love the sound they make as they go whooshing by." I mean, there was definitely a sense of like I needed a deadline to really sort of like get my juices flowing, and if I look back at that period, I kind of go, "Oh, I wish I was at more sort of organized, etc." But no, I think working for yourself, I think it's great. You have to like at this point in my career, I'm pretty organized about it. But I think the thing is not to get stuck in your own little world, and actually realizing that, like, meeting a former colleague for coffee, or taking that call, because VCs are great at like looking for free consulting, but like doing that 30-minute call with someone for VC, just all those things are where you're actually just getting back out and sort of like seeing what's going on in the sort of space that you're consulting into, I think is really, really important. I think that to me is, and I'm not feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm not working. Like you can't just constantly sort of sit there and be like, I'm an output machine.
Yeah.
I think you have to be sort of like realistic about like how many billable hours you can do in a week, or so I think that's really key for me, and just taking the time to continue sort of learning and hearing what's going on, and seeing like interesting stuff that's happening in your space.
Yeah. And so you're working with most of these clients on a longer term basis as you help them sort out some strategy stuff and then actually bring it to life.
Yeah. So typically, what's happened, the first couple of clients, like one of my first clients is actually, I don't think they'll mind me talking about it, is WorkVivo, who they were a software company who kind of like helped with employee engagement, and they were acquired by Zoom. But I kind of went in there and helped them with content strategy, and then sort of transitioned from that. Sort of like I'm still there as a sort of like an advisor and consultant, and just sort of like, basically just help their content folks, and sort of like, they're able to run stuff by me and meet with them weekly, so it's moving from that sort of like the idea that I always have at least probably 2 to 3 projects on the go. But ideally, like, those projects then move into sort of like some kind of retainer, which is a great way to work it if you can. It hasn't worked with everyone, obviously. But like it's probably a 50-50 split between like retainer work and project work.
Got it. That's very cool. One thing I find about working for myself is that it blatantly exposes all of my bad work habits, like stuff that there might be like some better barriers around in a regular 9-to-5 job, or just like out there. And I have found that to be like probably the single most difficult thing, is that like I say yes to too many things, you know what I mean? Or I don't organize my day properly, and then save the hardest thing for last. And like that is harder to do when you have like a teammate relying on you to get a thing done,
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's no hiding place. And actually, you know what? I actually have kind of someone who helps with research and admin, who does 8 hours a week for me. Nice. And like, even some weeks there was times where I was like, "Ooh, do I like how much work do I have for her?" But like, it's just a great way of putting some discipline on it. Having someone that you're like, oh, I gotta have stuff for her to do, or I gotta like get back to her and stuff. It just, yeah, I think that working solo thing can be quite tough.
It can.
Because you don't have someone to sort of keep you responsible.
Yeah, totally. Are you doing any writing these days?
I do a little bit of writing. Actually, I do a bit of writing on the side. Or I write for a business news site here in Ireland, thecurrency.news. So I write about like sort of tech for them. Some of the clients, yeah, like particularly I think with the earlier stage companies, I end up sort of like jumping in, particularly early on in the engagement and do some, like we'll actually write some stuff. But invariably I'm trying to like, yeah, not do as much writing and get like freelancers and folks do that. Like, without want to say, it's commoditized, fortunately, like writing at this stage. But there's some great subject matter experts out there who are like, and it's pretty economical to get them to write posts versus like, the rate I charge per hour for consulting doesn't necessarily make sense for me to speak content.
For sure. Do you enjoy it? I mean, I find that I miss writing quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I do actually. The thing about writing is it's been like running or something. I know you're a keen runner, but like you kind of have to do it regularly.
Yeah.
And then, if you haven't done it for a while and you go back and you try to write something, just why does this take me like 3 hours? I should have been able to do this like an hour. Whereas, when you're doing it regularly, and so I try to do some writing every week at least, just because I don't want to lose that muscle entirely.
Yeah, that's cool. I should do that. And you're so right about the running thing. Like I do really enjoy running. I run probably every day, 6 days a week, probably. And I was just talking to a friend recently and she said, I went out for a run and I ran for, 15, 20 minutes and I hated it. And I was like, oh, well, there's your problem. You have to go way longer and then you should do it every day. And then you'll eventually really like it.
And the other thing is, well, everyone hates it at some point, matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good you are or, what you've done before.
Yeah, totally. Do you have a website? Can we point people to a website?
I have a pretty basic website, but like johncollins.cc has all the contact points. So I think that's a good place to catch up and just, get in touch. And yeah, as I say, I'm always sort of obviously within reason, but I'm pretty open to chatting to folks about this kind of stuff. So yeah,
cool.
Get in touch.
All right, well, we'll link to that in show notes. We'll put your LinkedIn profile in there too, so people can take a look. You've been posting some interesting stuff, which I assume is from clients, like sharing content that they've done it. I found some good stuff in there when I was browsing through.
Invariably, yeah. A lot of the stuff is from clients or companies where I have investments and doing a bit of angel investing as well. So yeah,
nice.
It's a mixed bag. Yeah.
Well, very cool. We'll link to those. I'll try to grab links to Intercom, Off Script, Tomico's. Tomico, is that the company that they're
Atomico, the big VC. Ravio, RAVIO. Check out what they're doing on the content side. They're great. I did some consulting with them early on. What else did we mention? I think they were the main ones, right?
I think so. Yeah, we'll put links. I mean, I think it's cool for people to go check it out, get some inspiration from that.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. You've been very generous with your time today and for many years, actually. I've learned a lot from you. I know a lot of other folks have too. So we really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate that.
Take care, John.